Good afternoon, everyone. The meeting for the Assembly Committee on Growth and Infrastructure will now come to order. Will the Secretary please call the roll?
Assemblywoman Brown May.
Here.
Assemblyman Ellison.
Present.
Assemblyman Levitt.
Here.
Assemblyman Miller.
Here.
Assemblywoman Peters.
Here.
Assemblyman Roberts.
Here.
Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong.
Here.
Assemblyman Watts.
Here.
Assemblyman Wheeler.
Here.
Assemblyman Yeager. Chair Monroe Moreno.
And I am here.
Madam Chair, you ended up on mute.
Had to happen at least once today, right? We only have one member that will be joining us a little later. That will be Assemblyman Yeager. And as soon as he joins us, Madam Secretary, I will let you know that he has joined the meeting. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's meeting for the Assembly Committee on Growth and Infrastructure. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping things. We are still, the building is still closed and the meetings remain by Zoom. Today, we hope to hear the following measures this afternoon, and it will be presented in this order. Assembly Bill 413, followed by Assembly Bill 429, and then Assembly Bill 377, following up with AB 388. We must recess today because I think everyone on our committee has a 4 o'clock meeting that they need to attend. We will reconvene this meeting at the call of the chair, and it is my hopes that we will not go past 7 o'clock to reconvene tonight. And at that time, we will hear Assembly Bill 411 and 412. Tomorrow, Friday, although it is not our regular meeting day, April 8th, we will meet at the call of the chair. And at that time, we will hear AB 223 and AB 444. Immediately following those hearings, we will hold a work session on a number of measures. So, as we did at our Tuesday's meeting, in order to accommodate the most testimony possible for each measure, we will be limiting the comments and testimony for support, opposition, and neutral each to 15 minutes. All callers will be limited to just 2 minutes, but are encouraged to submit their testimony in writing to be included in the record and uploaded to Nellis. So with that, and not to waste any more time, we will go to our first bill. And as I will be presenting the first measure that we'll be hearing this afternoon, I will now request that our Vice Chair Watts, please facilitate this hearing.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With that, I will now open the hearing on Assembly Bill 413, which is being presented by our Chair, Monroe Moreno. Chair, whenever you are ready, you may begin your presentation.
Thank you, Vice Chair Watts and members of the committee. For the record, I am Assemblywoman Danielle Monroe Moreno, representing Assembly District 1. Today, I am here to present Assembly Bill 413, which requires the Nevada Department of Transportation, otherwise known as NDOT, to establish a working group to study the sustainability and equitability of funding solutions for the state's transportation system. Last interim, I had the honor of serving as chair of the Legislative Committee on Energy. Senate Concurrent Resolution 3 from the 2019 session directed the committee to consider alternative solutions for the transportation system funding, the benefits of using electric vehicles, and the costs of transportation-related pollution, including greenhouse gas emissions. Throughout the interim, I worked with a group of stakeholders representing local and state transportation agencies, labor organizations, clean energy, environmental agencies and organizations, the Trucking Association, and many other interested parties. We began identifying goals and outcomes for a fiscally and environmentally sustainable transportation system. During our discussions, it became apparent that in addition to maintaining our existing transportation infrastructure, we need to fund transit, bike, and walking, and use smarter land use planning, as well as consider how to best use clean energy and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We know the traditional funding model is not keeping up with the cost of maintaining our infrastructure. New vehicle technologies are having an effect on our gas tax revenue and the sustainability of our state's highway fund. During the interim, we reviewed alternate funding models that included how electric vehicle owners can equitably apply and pay for our roads. However, the stakeholders noted that more time should be given to analyzing these models and considering the benefits of electric vehicles and the cost of transportation-related pollution before any recommendations can be made to the legislature. During the interim, the Energy Committee also received information about the state's transportation system and current and future funding needs, transportation-related pollution, as well as recommendations to fix Nevada's gas tax. Nevada's Department of Transportation, the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, the Department of Motor Vehicles, and the Governor's Office of Energy noted it would be prudent to focus their collective efforts on bringing together and educating individuals, communities, and organizations from across the state on these issues to ensure they are understood. In addition, the options and solutions that are pursued by the state should be properly analyzed, vetted, and shared with the broader community. Based on this recommendation, the Energy Committee voted unanimously to require NDOT to establish a working group beginning in July 2021 and ending in December 2022. The bill summary, AB 143, sets forth the membership of the advisory working group. It includes representatives of the metropolitan planning organizations, environmental organizations and agencies, clean energy, local, county, tribal, state, and federal agencies with expertise in transportation and clean energy, chairs of the Senate and Assembly Committees on Growth and Infrastructure, labor organizations, and other interested persons and entities. In addition, the advisory working group must have a representative who is an expert in tax policy. A chair and vice chair will be elected by the advisory working group at its first meeting. The advisory working group must study the needs of all users of different modes of transportation, including bicyclists, pedestrians, motor vehicle drivers, and public transit users. In addition, the group must consider social and user transportation equity, the reduction of the greenhouse gas emission, the sustainability of the state highway fund, and the role of land use and smart growth strategies in reducing transportation emissions and improving system efficiencies and equity. The working group must collect and maintain and monitor data related to and develop preliminary plans for a sustainable transportation funding system. The department must submit a report on or before December 31st, 2022, with details of the working group's activities, findings, conclusions, and recommendations to the Director of the Legislative Council Bureau for the transmission to the 2023 legislature. There are two proposed amendments. The first, I am proposing to amend and delete sections 7 and 8 of section 1 of the bill, which requires the compensation of the legislative members of the advisory working group and travel expenses and per diem allowances for all members of the advisory working group. At a time when our state is faced with funding our transportation system, I believe the members of the working group will be willing to serve without compensation. There was another amendment proposed earlier today from the Las Vegas Metropolitan Chamber, asking to add a person from the business community, resort community to the board, which I find as a friendly amendment. So in conclusion, as a state, we must take a bold approach to our long-term issues associated with funding our transportation system. The time is to begin now. I thank you, Vice Chair Watts, and I'm available for questions.
Thank you very much for that presentation, Vice Chair. With that, we will now open it up to any questions from members. I don't see any in the chat. Folks can also wave me down on video if you have any. I believe we have a question from Assemblywoman Peters. Go ahead.
Thank you, Vice Chair. So I was curious about Section 7 or subsection 7 and 8 in the bill related to salary and per diem and compensation. And I know in my experience working in our rural communities and sometimes in our urban communities as well, having people come to the table from a variety of backgrounds, not just the professional backgrounds, can be limited by the fact of missing a day of work or not having access to transportation to get to wherever the meeting is. So my question is whether this committee would be open to having this kind of digital meeting, and whether that would be considered for this upcoming interim outside of the recovery from the pandemic as we move forward, in order to help address that kind of potential need from some stakeholders who may be included in this working group.
Through you, Vice Chair Watts, to Assemblywoman Peters. This is Assemblywoman Danielle Monroe Moreno, and that would be a yes. Due to the pandemic, our stakeholder meeting started out in person. We held, I want to say 7 or 8 stakeholder meetings discussing the subject matter. We started with meetings in person with groups in North and South, and we used Zoom long before we had to. But then once the pandemic hit, all of our meetings were conducted by Zoom. And because of the adjustment of taking out the pay, I feel that continuing in this platform is vitally necessary for this group to do the work that they need to get done, so that we make sure that we are properly funding our highways. So yes.
Great. Thank you for that. Also, just to be clear, I want to make sure that this, if we didn't note it already for the Secretary, that Assemblyman Yeager has arrived. Do we have any other questions for members? All right. Let's see here. Seeing none, with that, we'll move on to testimony on Assembly Bill 413. As a reminder, we'll be limiting testimony in support, opposition, and neutral to 15 minutes, and we'll ask each caller to limit their remarks to 2 minutes and to please clearly state and spell their name before beginning. With that, we'll turn it over to Broadcast Production Services to see if there are any callers in the queue wishing to testify in support of AB 413.
To testify in support of Assembly Bill 13, Assembly Bill 13, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits of 638. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Thank you, Vice Chair and members of the committee. My name is Alexis Motorex, Alexis Motarex, with the Nevada Chapter Associated General Contractors, representing the commercial construction industry in Northern Nevada. We are here in support of AB 413. The AGC has been an advocate for equitable and sustainable highway funding for years. We participated in the SCR3 committee during the interim, and although we would have liked to see something come of the committee's work other than another study, we would rather continue the conversation than risk the issue being ignored further. We respectfully ask that a representative of the contracting community be listed as one of the NDOT appointees. As I said, the AGC has been a longtime advocate for sustainable highway funding and can bring the historical knowledge as well as an unbiased perspective on construction. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go on to the next caller in support.
Caller with the last 3 digits of 552. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Monroe Moreno, Vice Chair Watts, and members of the committee. My name is Angela Castro, Angela Castro, with the Regional Transportation Commission of Southern Nevada. As the public transportation provider and the Metropolitan Planning Organization for Southern Nevada, the RTC is in support of Assembly Bill 413 that will continue to study our state's mobility needs that includes long-term funding, equity, and sustainability priorities. We look forward to participating in these discussions, and thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. We'll go on to the next caller.
Caller with the last three digits of 081. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair and members of the committee. For the record, this is Dylan Keith, DYLAN KEITH, Policy Analyst with the Vegas Chamber. The Chamber is in support of AB 413 and would like to thank the committee chair for bringing this bill forward today. As you have heard today, this bill will allow for the creation of an advisory working group. We believe this proposed list of members is a good composition of experts and stakeholders. We also believe this working group will be a valuable resource as we continue to work together on transportation needs in our community. To share with you, the Chamber has a long history of supporting a multimodal and intermodal transportation system that promotes regional connectivity, increases productivity, and reduces congestion. We also have strong working relationships with the Nevada Department of Transportation and the Regional Transportation Commission, and have collaborated over the years on supporting a strong and reliable transportation system. From our perspective, this means economic stability, job creation, and business growth for Southern Nevada. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Mr. Keith. We'll go on to the next caller in support.
Caller with the last three digits of 139. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Thank you, Vice Chair and Chair Monroe Moreno. This is Misty Grimmer with the Nevada Resort Association. We are in support of AB 413, and I won't repeat what other callers have said about the importance of transportation, but we are in support of the bill and very much appreciate the chairwoman accepting the amendment that was proposed by the Chamber that would include the Resort Association and the Chamber in the study group. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Grimmer. We'll go on to the next caller.
Caller with the last three digits of 516. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Thank you, Vice Chair Watts and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Amanda Brazo with Rowe Law Group on behalf of the Nevada chapter of the American Council of Engineering Companies. That's Amanda, last name Brazo, Brazeeau. The Nevada chapter of the engineers supports Assembly Bill 413 because of the need to modernize how we fund our highways as increasing mileage standards and advancing technology have continued to eat away at our existing funding model, making it unsustainable for the long term. ACEC supports the continuation of the study commenced after the last session in order to bring a comprehensive solution to the legislature in 2023. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go on to the next caller in support.
If you are just joining us, we are currently taking testimony in support of Assembly Bill 413. If you wish to testify in support, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, we have no further callers in support.
Thank you. With that, we'll go on to any testimony in opposition of Assembly Bill 413.
To testify in opposition of Assembly Bill 413, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, we have no callers in opposition.
Thank you. With that, we'll go on to testimony in the neutral position. We'll start with phone calls, and then I believe we have some folks from agencies, and we'll give that on the Zoom, and we'll give them an opportunity after we check the phones. So EPS, can we see if we have anyone in the queue to testify in neutral on AB 413?
To testify in neutral on Assembly Bill 413, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Vice Chair, we have no callers in the neutral position.
Thank you very much, Broadcast Production Services. With that, I'll turn it over to anyone who is on the Zoom, particularly from our agencies, if they would like to offer testimony in the neutral position. I believe we have the Department of Transportation. Would you like to go first?
Thank you very much, Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Sandra Rosenberg from the Nevada Department of Transportation. We are neutral on this bill. We look forward to continuing this analysis, to continuing the conversation. Obviously, we're very interested in a sustainable transportation funding source. We do have some minor concerns on the bill as currently written, primarily the number of members on the committee, since that is not specified, and some of the terminology is a little bit broad. So we would like to provide some language to you later today, Chairman Moreno, to try to address that, as well as the extensive scope of this bill and the timeline. We would hope it would be amenable to this committee to move the land use and sustainable development conversation to a future phase of this analysis. We know it's absolutely critical to this conversation. We look forward to doing that analysis, but in the timeline given, we have some concerns in terms of addressing really the funding shortfall and mechanisms first, and then going on to the land use piece. However, regardless of whether or not that's acceptable to this committee, we look forward to working on this. And whatever this bill includes, we are happy to dig in and get into this analysis and come back next session with hopefully an excellent solution for sustainable transportation funding. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony. I believe we also have Mr. Sever with the DMV, and I'd like to offer if the DMV would like to provide any testimony.
No, thank you, Mr. Vice Chair.
Great. Is there anybody else on the Zoom that I am missing who would like to provide neutral testimony? All right. Seeing none, Madam Chair, are there any closing remarks that you would like to make?
Thank you, Vice Chair Watts. Assemblywoman Danielle Monroe Moreno, for the record, the only thing that I would add is that we have a responsibility to work with everyone together as we come to a sustainable and equitable solution of how we fund our highways. I think we've heard in numerous testimonies in this committee and others of how we're falling behind and to do what we need to do for infrastructure, especially for our highways. So I encourage your support for this piece of legislation. It had lengthy discussions in the interim with all of the stakeholders mentioned. I think we had up to 42 individuals at some of our meetings virtually. So it's a very important topic as we move forward in the state of Nevada. So I encourage your support and thank you for the opportunity to present this bill today.
Thank you very much for the presentation, Madam Chair, and the work. With that, I will close the hearing on Assembly Bill 413, and I will turn the gavel back over to the chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair Watts. We will now move to the second item on our agenda, and that will be Assembly Bill 429. The presenters for Assembly Bill 429 will be Mr. Michael Alonso, and he may be joined with a few others, I believe Ms. Alyssa Nave and Dylan Sullivan. So for you all, the virtual floor is yours.
Chair, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
This is Michael Alonso. I can't, for some reason, I can't start my video, so I apologize for that. But
there you go.
Okay.
We see you now.
Good afternoon, Chairman Moreno and members of the committee. I'm Michael Alonso, and I'm here on behalf of Turo Inc., which is a peer-to-peer platform company. I also want to introduce Ethan Wilson, who's also with Turo. I believe he's on the Zoom with us today.
I am indeed, Mike.
And first of all, just for some background, I do want to thank you, Chair, for bringing AB 429 in order to create a regulatory framework for peer-to-peer car sharing in the state of Nevada. And as you know, we've all spent a lot of time with stakeholders and yourself on putting this framework together. I'm going to have Mr. Wilson walk the committee through the bill. We have submitted an amendment that is on Nellis that's intended to address drafting issues that came out of the bill. And when you're ready, Mr. Wilson can start walking the committee through the bill.
You can go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam Chair and Mr. Vice Chair and members of the committee. My name is Ethan Wilson. I'm a proud Nevadan and resident of Washoe County. I'm here on behalf of Turo, an internet-based peer-to-peer car sharing platform. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today and help present Assembly Bill 429. And more than just supporting AB 429, I'm here to express our support for smart, tailored, and consumer-minded regulation of peer-to-peer car sharing. I want to take this opportunity to thank Chairwoman Monroe Moreno and everyone who's worked on this piece of legislation for a very deliberative and collaborative process. Turo is a peer-to-peer car sharing platform that connects car owners with those in need of transportation, neighbors, families, students, workers, travelers, anyone with the need for mobility. Before I dive into the bill, I want to stress that on the Turo platform, personal car owners, or hosts as we like to call them, have 100% pricing power over their vehicles. They earn extra income to help cover their rising cost of car ownership and student loans, while at the same time allowing for more and more drivers, or guests as we like to call them, to forego car ownership altogether. Guests can choose from hundreds of different makes and models and price points to find the perfect car for their specific needs. So I'll now quickly run through at a pretty high level an outline of AB 429. And as Mike suggested, I'll be working off the amendment that's available on Nellis. That amendment really is designed to kind of fix a couple of things and kind of bring it back in line with some language that we had and our coalition and stakeholders had initially been working off of. And I know we're on a limited time frame, so I will be as efficient as possible, hitting on major issues and themes within the bill. But please let me know with any questions that you all may have. Okay, so sections 3 through 12 in the amended version does change sort of the numbering off by 1 after section 8, I believe. It defines the car sharing period, the car sharing start time, the car sharing termination time, a number of other definitions that ensure that there are no gaps in insurance coverage. And they clearly dictate insurance coverage that's applicable during the car sharing period. Section 14 is predominantly the insurance provision, albeit there are a number of sections that do deal with insurance within this bill. Specifically, Section 14 establishes insurance requirements and mandates that a peer-to-peer car sharing program or company assume the liability of a shared vehicle owner. I want to stress that all the insurance as laid out in the framework in the bill meets all current Nevada requirements. Specifically, Section 14 sub 4 reads that a peer-to-peer car sharing program shall ensure that during each car sharing period, both the shared vehicle owner and the shared vehicle driver are insured under a motor vehicle liability insurance policy, meeting all requirements as set forth in NRS. In the name of efficiency and perhaps brevity, I'll kind of move on from the insurance pieces, but I do want to stress that this is an insurance framework that is the product of years of dialogue and debate among stakeholders and was officially adopted by the National Council of Insurance Legislators at their annual meeting in December of 2019. Section 17 deals with records retention. It requires peer-to-peer car sharing programs to collect and maintain and provide access under certain conditions to transaction records, including the exact times, locations, and fees paid applicable to any peer-to-peer car sharing transaction. Sections 21 to 25 deal with licensure and regulation by the Department of Motor Vehicles. These sections include requirements necessary to apply for and receive a license to operate a peer-to-peer car sharing program in Nevada. Section 22 also includes grounds for refusal and suspension and revocation of a peer-to-peer car sharing program license. Section 26 relates to disclosures, specifically requiring a peer-to-peer car sharing program to disclose to program participants, that's shared vehicle owners and shared vehicle drivers, the daily rates and fees and any insurance or protection package costs that are charged to the shared vehicle owner or the shared vehicle driver, as well as provide disclosure for emergency roadside assistance phone numbers. Section 27 deals with driver licensure. Specifically states that a peer-to-peer car sharing program may not enter into a car sharing program agreement with the shared vehicle driver unless that person possesses a valid driver's license issued by the Department of Motor Vehicles or a valid license issued by the person's home state. It also requires a peer-to-peer car sharing program maintain record of the name and address of each shared vehicle driver, the shared vehicle, the driver's license number of each person who will operate the shared vehicle, and the state of issuance of each driver's license. Section 30, specifically sub 2, pertains to airports, and in particular clarifies that nothing in the bill prohibits or restricts an airport's ability from setting terms and conditions, including fees, of agreements entered into with peer-to-peer car sharing programs. I will stress that we are currently working with airport representatives on further language aimed at addressing adding the terminology of the shared vehicle driver to that provision. And specifically as well, I do want to thank all the representatives from both major airports for playing an active role and very collaborative role in developing AB 429 and its framework. We will continue to work with the airport representatives to fine tune some of this language over the next day or so, but I am confident that we will reach an agreement that works for both parties. The framework and requirements set forth in AB 429 provide both legal clarity and robust protection for Nevadans participating in peer-to-peer car sharing. We stress the importance of smart, tailored regulation of peer-to-peer car sharing, and we want to make sure that everyone, vehicle owners and drivers, feel safe and protected while sharing their car or driving a shared vehicle. With passage and enactment of AB 429, we are confident that peer-to-peer car sharing will continue to provide safe and affordable transportation options to Nevadans all across the state. To reiterate, we are thankful for the opportunity to provide input during this process, together with just the awesome group of stakeholders that we've had in this process. We can ensure the safety, efficiency, and accessibility of peer-to-peer car sharing in Nevada for years to come. We at Turo view Nevada as our partner and our partner increasing mobility options within the state and our partner ushering in a new era of connected sharing. So with that, I'll thank the committee and thank everyone for their help in working on this and continuing over the next rather short period of time to continue to fine tune some of this. Thank you for your time today and for the opportunity to present AB 429.
And Madam Chair, this is Mike Alonso again. I thought it would be important to share with the committee that there is a companion bill to this. It's in the Senate, Senate Bill 389, which is the revenue side of this. And Chair, you're well aware of that, but I wanted to share for the committee if it makes sense. What that bill would do is to require that the peer-to-peer car sharing platforms would collect and remit the 10% government services charge on the gross receipt of the sharing of revenue, as well as there are two special acts under, I believe it's NRS 284. There's a 2% charge that goes to Clark County, and I believe that's primarily used right now to fund the Smith Center. And there's a 2% charge in Washoe County that funds the minor league baseball stadium. And so I just want to make sure that people were aware of that in case they had questions about that. And that creates parity with the rental car side. They're also collecting and remitting those same taxes.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Yes, Senator Neal is carrying that bill, the companion bill, on the Senate side. Ms. Nave?
Are you ready for me?
Chairman Monroe Moreno and members of the committee, for the record, my name is Alyssa Naveworth, here today on behalf of Enterprise Holdings, LLC. We are here today in support of Assembly Bill 329 regarding the regulatory construct for peer-to-peer car sharing as a companion to Senate Bill 389, which provides for the taxation framework for peer-to-peer car sharing. The basis of Assembly Bill 329 codifies the concepts of the model peer-to-peer car sharing legislation created by the National Council of Insurance Legislators, commonly referred to as INCWAIL. Enterprise participated in those important negotiations and has participated in conversations across the nation as state after state works on this important issue. We want to, in particular, thank Chair Monroe Moreno for her leadership throughout the interim on this important legislation. We also want to thank Senator Neal for her leadership on Senate Bill 389. And we want to thank our partners at Turo for the many conversations that we have, which we believe have culminated in an appropriate response as a result of 329. In every state of the nation and at the table at INCWAIL, Enterprise has supported the INCWAIL insurance model as companion legislation to taxation legislation. As Enterprise believes that the peer-to-peer car sharing fundamentally competes with traditional car rental providers, and we believe that there should be regulatory and tax parity across all stakeholders. Accordingly, the substance of Assembly Bill 329 is one half the solution to addressing the lack of regulation oversight over peer-to-peer car sharing platforms. When considered with 389, we believe this is a positive step forward for appropriate regulation and taxation here in Nevada. Again, I also want to once again thank Chair Monroe Moreno and Mike Alonso and Ethan Wilson for their professionalism throughout this process, and we look forward to working together and getting this bill passed.
Thank you so much. Mr. Alonso, was that it for the presentation?
Yes, Chair, that's it. We're happy to be in support and answer questions.
Thank you so much. So with that, members, is there anyone with questions? I know I have two people that have asked. So we will start with Assemblyman Levitt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is just kind of a clarification issue because sometimes I don't speak LCB so well. In Section 13, subsections 5 through 11. So when we're talking about the insurance that the peer-to-peer car would need when they're renting out the car. So that's an insurance policy above and beyond whatever the insurance policy is on the car currently, right? When the person is driving, when the person who owns the vehicle is just driving their car, they have to have insurance. But there's a separate insurance policy on top of that, correct?
I'm happy to take this one. Yes, Assemblymember Levitt, that is exactly correct. So within the peer-to-peer car sharing space, I suppose you can look at insurance through two different lenses. You can look at insurance through the shared vehicle owner's lens, and that is, to your point, an individual who's not actually driving that car, right, while it's being shared. And you can look at insurance through the shared vehicle driver lens, who's the individual who will be sharing that car during the peer-to-peer car sharing period. And so what happens is when these events are triggered, like let's say the beginning of the car sharing period, which is defined in this bill, we operate under the assumption that the individual's car, or excuse me, the individual who owns that car, his or her policy is not covering. And so what happens is at that moment in time, there's no gap that this insurance policy covers that. Now, what it could operate as is either the individual who's driving that car, if his or her policy covers it, or a policy that's provided by the peer-to-peer car sharing program. And at no time is there a gap in any type of insurance coverage.
Thank you, follow-up, Chair. So let's just call it the extra insurance policy while the person's essentially renting the vehicle. So it's either if they can use their own insurance policy, that would be obviously dependent on the driver. If they can't use their own insurance policy, who picks up the tab for that extra insurance policy? Because the insurance on the vehicle currently is they're not going to just stop it and then start it back a week later when they're not sharing a car anymore. So who's responsible for that insurance policy while the second peer is driving the vehicle?
Yeah, through the chair.
Mr. Wilson, I'll need you to state your name each time you speak for the record. I know it's repetitive, but it's necessary. Thank you.
Sure, absolutely. Through the chair, this is, and for the record, this is Ethan Wilson with Turo. So that's an excellent question. So how it works with the pricing of through the transaction is that policy that, of course, meets all requirements in NRS is part of the policy at no added cost. So that policy that you're talking about that takes the place, if you will, of that owner's policy, that is part of the trip fee, I suppose you could call it. It's a part of the cost of that transaction, and that's not waivable. That policy will always be there. But I also will stress that the individual who's driving that car has the opportunity to increase coverages if they would like, and increase damage coverages for that vehicle itself. So at no point will an individual be able to actually waive entirely the insurance coverage that satisfies all the requirements of NRS, and nor are they charged, let's say, extra for that. That is part of the trip fee that the individual who's driving that car will pay for as a part of that transaction.
Okay, so how I understand it is the person renting, and I'm just going to use the word rent because I can't, because Pier 1 and Pier 2 is silly to say. So the renter, it's essentially already built into the fee for renting that car for that period of time.
For the record, this is Ethan Wilson. Through the chair, yes, that's exactly correct.
So if they use their own insurance policy, like their own personal insurance policy, do they still pay that fee?
Yes, that's correct. So it's, for the record, this is Ethan Wilson. There's no delineation of that policy that covers that transaction no matter what.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for clearing that up. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Assemblyman Wheeler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And section 27 of the amendment, what do we got? 1B2, it says the sharing program shall keep a record of name and address of each shared driver, number of the driver's license of each shared driver, and other person who will operate the vehicle. Where are those records kept? How are they kept? And who are they available to?
So, of course, excuse me, for the record, this is Ethan Wilson. Through the chair, Assemblyman. So these, of course, we are, as a platform, I can only speak on behalf of Turo, but as a platform, we comply with any applicable state privacy laws. So that will, depending on the state, and of course Nevada, that will dictate when that information is available, but that information is collected and maintained through the Turo platform.
Okay, thank you.
Assemblywoman Brown May.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much for the presentation. I have a question with regard to licensing. So if I look at the amendment, it's section 21 or section 20 in the original bill, identifies that a person shall hold a valid license issued by the department pursuant to this chapter to do this. My question is relative to the license, and what exactly does that mean? Do I need to apply to the Secretary of State and become a small business and have a business license? Is this a special license that's only issued by the DMV relative to this peer-to-peer car sharing? Could you just give us a little more detail about that?
Absolutely. For the record, this is Ethan Wilson, through the chair, Assemblywoman. Yeah, so I think to your question, it's more of the latter part of that. This is a license that's designed to be specific for peer-to-peer car sharing through the Department of Motor Vehicles, and that the Department of Motor Vehicles, of course, has regulatory authority and rule-making capacity to promulgate rules that sort of more fully flesh out, if you will, the requirements, the specific application requirements for these for this particular license.
Follow up, Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
Do we currently have, and I guess I really would be interested to hear from the DMV relative to what workload this is going to put on them. Is this a new license, or is this something that they already manage in a different way?
Madam Chair, J.D. Decker, for the record, Chief of Nevada DMV's Compliance Enforcement Division. In order to answer the Assemblywoman's question, this establishes a new license in law subject to the jurisdiction of the department. We spent about the last 3 years working with Mr. Alonso on the requirements and the regulatory authority that we would need in order to regulate the peer-to-peer car sharing business, because there doesn't exist an applicable license in law. Currently, we have dealer licenses, we have short-term lesser licenses. This business model doesn't really fit very neatly into either of those. So this would establish the department's jurisdiction and a new license type, and we're prepared to execute that on behalf of the state.
Thank you, Mr. Decker. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Members, is there anyone else wishing to ask a question? Okay, seeing none, then I will ask our broadcasting staff to open up the lines for callers wishing to testify in support. And callers, I will remind you, you have 2 minutes, and we'll be doing testimony, 15 minutes for support, opposition, and neutral. BPS, do we have anyone on the line to testify in support?
Testify in support of Assembly Bill 429. Please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits of 732. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Kyle Davis. That's KYLEDAVIS. And I appear today on behalf of Fluid Truck. Fluid Truck is a truck sharing platform focused on connecting small businesses with the right size truck for their needs and to give them access to electric trucks. We are a member of the coalition that has worked on this bill, and we appreciate the efforts of the Chairwoman Ro Moreno and everybody that has been a part of putting this legislation together. We are in support of the legislation and would urge its passage. Thank you.
Thank you. Next caller.
Chair, we have no more callers in support of Assembly Bill 429.
Thank you so much. Do we have any callers in the queue who wish to make testimony in opposition?
To testify in opposition of Assembly Bill 429, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, we have no callers in opposition.
Thank you. Do we have any callers in the queue who wish to testify in the neutral position?
To testify in neutral on Assembly Bill 429, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits of 739. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Joanna Jacob, Joanna Jacob, Clark County Government Affairs Manager. Madam Chair, I'm testifying neutral today on Assembly Bill 429. As Mr. Wilson and Mr. Alonso stated, we have been participating in the discussions on this bill on behalf of Clark County Department of Aviation, under which McCarran Airport operates. It is very important for the airport to regulate the safety of the access to the airport grounds. We appreciate the flexibility that Mr. Alonso, Mr. Wilson have given us in the amended version, and also Mr. Wilson's acknowledgement that we are continuing to work on Section 30. We think that that amendment is very important to the airport and wanted to put that on the record today. We will continue to work with them as this bill moves forward. And thank you, Madam Chair, for making sure that the Clark County Department of Aviation is at the table and that our concerns are heard. Thank you.
Thank you. Next caller.
Caller with the last 3 digits of 514. Please press star 9. Please press star 6 to unmute. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Yes, this is Matthew Sharp for the Nevada Justice Association, and we are speaking in a neutral position. My colleague Allison Brazier will be dealing with some other substantive issues. My primary issue is in relation to the insurance aspect, and I just want to be clear that once the owner of the vehicle rents the vehicle to a person over the platform, the personal auto policy on that vehicle will not provide coverage. You don't get coverage under your personal auto policy for engaging in a business type transaction. In addition, there is federal immunity that's provided to the owner of the vehicle. So the point of increasing the insurance is to increase the insurance to $5,100 for the provider of the service, the Toro in our example. So when the sponsors talk about double insurance, there is no such thing in this context. And so with that, I have no further comments, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Sharp, for your comments, but I am going to ask our committee secretary not to lot that into neutral. Your testimony was more in the position of opposition since you were asking for changes to the bill. So thank you so much for the comments, and I will move on to the next caller.
Chair, we have no more callers in neutral at this time.
Thank you so much for that. I will go back to the presenters of the bill and ask if you have any closing statements.
Thank you, Chair. This is Mike Alonso for the record. And we are having discussions with NJA, and we'll continue to have those discussions as well on the issues that Mr. Sharp raised, as well as we've had discussions with Allison Brazier. I do want to just say, just for the record, and it's technical insurance stuff, so if I need help, I don't know if Mr. Wilson is still on the line, but I don't think he was saying that the owner's policy is covering at the same time. I think what he's talking about in response to a question was that the platform's policy and or the driver's policy, one of them will be there all of the time. We understand the issues with the owner's policy, but this is intended to make sure there isn't a gap so that either the platform's policy or the driver's policy is covering at all times. And with that, I do want to again thank you, Chair, and we'll continue to work with Clark County and the NJA and get back to you. And again, I appreciate all of your efforts on this bill. And I do want to say, Mr. Wilson covered it. I'm thanking everybody, but I do want to thank Alyssa Nave. Appreciate her team and all the work that they did and their professionalism in working with us as well.
Thank you so much. We thank you for joining us. And with that, we will end the hearing on Assembly Bill 429. And I see that Assemblywoman Duran has been able to join us. So we will open the hearing on Assembly Bill 377 to be presented by Assemblywoman Duran. When you're ready, the floor is yours, ma'am.
Good afternoon, Chair Moreno and members of the committee. Thank you. For the record, I'm Assemblywoman B. Duran, representing Assembly District 11 in Clark County. I am pleased to introduce Assembly Bill 377 for your consideration today. Assembly Bill 377 helps low-income households with their monthly broadband bills. If the wage earners in the household if the wage earners in that household have been furloughed or laid off, paying the internet bill is a big problem, and upgrading services may be out of the question. Federal Communication, FCC, administers a program known as Lifeline. It reduces the cost of telephone service for low-income households to ensure they have reliable access. And Nevada has its own Lifeline program that complements the FCC. And here's how Lifeline works. Telecom carriers pay a quarterly assessment to the Public Utilities Commission of Nevada, or PUCN, based on a percentage of their in-state revenues. The assessments are placed in a fund to maintain the availability of telephone service. The carrier gives low-income customers a reduced rate, and the carrier is then reimbursed from the fund for the revenue they would have made otherwise. Several federal stimulus measures have recently allowed the FCC to expand the Lifeline program to support access to broadband services too. Assembly Bill 377 would do the same thing for the Nevada's Lifeline program. In 2003, the legislature deregulated broadband service in Nevada. The PUCN is prohibited from imposing any requirements related to the rates and the availability of broadband, although the commission retains some authority over providers that are public utilities. In conversation following the introduction of AB 377, PUCN staff offered alternative language that recognizes deregulation while still carrying out the intent of the bill. I have submitted that language as a conceptual amendment, and that is posted on Nellis. Joining us today is Brea Wiggler. I'm sorry if I messed your name up, Miss Brea. Okay. Assistant General Counsel at the PUCN, who will discuss the sections of the amended bill. Before I turn things over to her, I want to highlight a few things. In Section 3 of the amendment, there is a new definition of broadband service offered, as the existing definition adopted in 2003 is obsolete. The new definition of broadband service for the purposes of the Lifeline program is a two-way service capable of transmitting information at a minimum speeds that the PUCN will determine annually. Next, Section 2 of the amendment introduces a new category of telecommunication provider known as Lifeline broadband service providers and specifies that they are not public utilities. This section is necessary because of deregulation. Finally, Section 3 of amendment directs the PUCN to consider several things when they revise the rules for the Lifeline program. In addition to the amount of support available from the Federal Universal Service Fund, the PUCN must consider both the number of persons in the household that need the broadband service and the type of online activity that people in the household will need to do. Every family's needs are different. A household may have several school-aged children and adults working remotely, or it may have one person working out of the home who needs a minimum internet connectivity to send emails and schedule, and schedule appointments. For some basic services may be sufficient, while other households require faster speeds. The amendment directs the PUCN to consider these factors. At this point, I would like to ask Ms. Terwilliger to explain the various sections of the amendment, and then we are happy to take questions from the committee. I believe there are several other PUCN staff joining this meeting who will assist with questions also. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Chairman Moreno, Vice Chair Watts, and thank you, Assemblywoman Duran, for engaging the PUC regarding this legislation. I'll just walk through the bill section by section. I'm going off of the conceptual amendment submitted by Ms. Duran, or Assemblywoman Duran, on April 6, 2021. So Section 2, as Assemblywoman Duran mentioned, defines Lifeline broadband service provider. The intent of this term is to ensure that broadband providers can become eligible to provide Lifeline discounts to their customers, including by receiving Nevada Universal Service support. Section 3 is a definition of broadband service. As Ms. Duran mentioned, the current definition of broadband service is a little bit outdated. This definition will require the PUC annually to revisit minimum speeds for broadband, and those speeds might be different for wired or wireless service. In Section 4, we rename and update the Nevada Universal Service Fund to be the fund to maintain the availability of telecommunications or broadband service. Section 5 clarifies that a lifeline broadband service provider is not a public utility, as Assemblywoman Duran mentioned, and it accomplishes a lighter touch regulation for these types of providers, although we will require some oversight given that they will be receiving funds from the Nevada Universal Service Fund. Section 6, the proposed modifications to this section makes it clear that lifeline broadband service providers are not subject to the mill assessment and instead pay an annual registration fee like the wireless or CMRS providers do. It also requires that lifeline broadband service providers register with the PUC. In Section 7, Section 5 of Section 7 modifies language to conform with a new name for the Nevada Universal Service Fund. And it also requires that lifeline broadband service providers contribute to the Nevada Universal Service Fund. Section 6 of Section 7 is a cleanup item in the sense that right now lifeline eligibility is determined at the federal level by the national verifier, which is USAC. And as such, Nevada no longer employs an administrator to determine lifeline eligibility. Section 7 of that section conforms to deletion of Section 6 regarding the national verifier and the eligibility for lifeline. In Section 8, this section generally provides that the PUC does not regulate broadband service with some exceptions. In Section 2E, the language provides a new exception to the general rule that the PUC does not regulate broadband service. And it would permit the PUC to regulate broadband services for the purpose of ensuring that the Lifeline program can be used to reduce broadband rates for eligible customers. In Section 4 of Section 8, the language deletes the prior definition of broadband service, which had a minimum outdated speed threshold, as I mentioned earlier. Section 9, similar to the changes to Section 8, this section ensures that the PUC has the appropriate regulatory authority over IP-enabled service as it concerns Lifeline discounts. Section 10 requires the PUC to adopt regulations for eligibility for a broadband discount from the Lifeline program. Other changes to this section ensure that the high cost fund, we have kind of a couple of components, the Nevada Universal Service Fund. In addition to providing Lifeline support, it also provides high cost support. And it ensures that the high cost fund can only be utilized for voice service at this time. And that's to ensure the rural providers who get high cost support can maintain that support that they're getting right now through the fund. In Section 11, the changes to NRS 704.68867 are meant to establish new reporting requirements that will assist the PUC in determining the broadband speeds annually. This will also help the PUC provide additional data to the legislature as to the availability of broadband in Nevada and the reach of the Lifeline funding in terms of providing broadband service to eligible customers. In Section 12, this begins some changes to Chapter 707 of the NRS, and they're meant to conform with the changes in Chapter 704, which would permit Lifeline broadband service providers to receive funds from the Nevada Universal Service Fund. There also is a cleanup item in that we are adding CMRS to the list of providers that are eligible for funds from the Nevada Universal Service Fund. Section 13, this was mentioned by Assemblywoman Duran. The modifications to this section require the PUC to establish a formula for providing lifetime discounts to the NUSF, the Nevada Universal Service Fund, that takes into account a variety of factors. One of those factors is to the extent there is available federal funding at that time for any particular eligible Lifeline provider. As Assemblywoman Duran mentioned, there is a federal subsidy going on right now. It's called the Emergency Broadband Benefit. For eligible customers, that will be up to $50 per household on non-tribal lands and $75 per household on non-tribal lands. The intent of this section is that the PUC will take into account the federal discount that's available, as well as what Assemblywoman Duran mentioned, which was the number of persons in the household and how they're using their broadband service. The last provision in Section 13 makes it clear that Lifeline broadband service providers are only eligible to receive funding from the Nevada Universal Service Fund for the purposes of broadband service. In other words, Lifeline broadband service providers are not eligible for any funding to support voice or high-cost service from the Nevada Universal Service Fund. And that's the section by section walkthrough. I'm available to answer any questions that might come up. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Assemblywoman Duran, did you have anything else to add before we go to questions from the committee members?
No, that's pretty much basic. What we wanted to do is make sure that our low-income families can get broadband services based on the number of people in the household. Thank you. And we are ready for questions.
Thank you. I know that we have a few. We will start with Assemblyman Levitt.
I think the low-income families should get, the students aren't getting
Thank you, Madam Chair.
welfare, aren't getting their education on the computers.
Yeah, I know.
Somebody's asking my question for me. So the Lifeline program's already currently funded.
God damn it.
As it currently exists.
If I could just remind all the members to mute your mics unless you're speaking. Thank you. Assemblyman Levitt, go ahead.
So the Lifeline program as it currently exists, how is it currently funded?
You can answer that.
Okay, Chairman Moreno, through you to Assemblyman Levitt. This is Debria Terwilliger for the record. The Lifeline Fund, there's a federal assessment that shows up on customer bills for a variety of providers, telecommunications, voice over internet protocol providers, wireless, CMRS providers. And for the NUSF, we do an assessment rate that also sometimes gets passed on to customers, and that assessment also shows up on customer bills. And that's an assessment on intrastate revenues.
So it's federally funded?
It's a mix. If we're talking about the federal Lifeline program, that's federally funded. If we're talking about the Nevada Universal Service Fund, that is funded through an assessment on carriers who provide service in Nevada, and an assessment on intrastate revenue.
So who funds it? How is it funded locally?
Assemblywoman Moreno, through you to Assemblyman Levitt. This is Debria Terwilliger for the record. So currently, the folks who fund the Nevada Universal Service Fund, or the carriers who provide that, are competitive suppliers. Those are AT&T, CenturyLink, the small-scale providers of last resort, who are the rural providers. There's Rural Telephone, Humboldt Telephone, also the wireless carriers, Verizon, T-Mobile. We currently do not assess, because we do not regulate broadband, we do not assess broadband providers, and they do not pay into the Nevada Universal Service Fund. But the conceptual amendment submitted by Assemblywoman Duran would assess any Lifeline broadband service providers who were getting a discount for their customers. So it wouldn't assess all broadband providers, only those who become Lifeline broadband service providers.
Okay, thank you. Madam Chair, can I follow up on that just a little bit, because I'm a little confused? So
just one more and then we'll move on.
Okay, so the Lifeline program is, so these broadband service providers that fund this Lifeline program to allow for the discounts, is that something that they opt into? Are they required to do it? And on top of that, if they decide that they want to seek federal grants or whatever it is that they're eligible for, would that be on top of whatever they've funded so far, or would that potentially eliminate their burden to fund the Lifeline program locally?
Chairman Moreno, through you to Assemblyman Levitt. This is Debria Terwilliger.
You can go directly to the member.
Okay, thank you. I will do that. This is Debria Terwilliger for the record. I think there's two questions there. Let me make sure I get both of them. If a broadband provider would only have to contribute to the Nevada Universal Service Fund if they voluntarily became a Lifeline broadband service provider. So they would not be, broadband providers generally would not be required to contribute to the fund, but if they became a Lifeline broadband service provider, they would have to contribute to the fund based on the conceptual amendment. The second question you had is the FCC benefit. The way that the FCC is structured, its emergency broadband benefit is that the folks who are, or the carriers who are eligible to give that discount to their customers either are designated by the states as an eligible telecommunications carrier. So we've designated several carriers as eligible telecommunications carriers, or if they get the FCC's, the Federal Communications Commission's approval to provide that emergency broadband benefit, they can also provide the discount to the customers. I was on the FCC's website earlier. I think there's about 10 Nevada companies who are eligible now to get to provide that $50 emergency broadband benefit to their customers in Nevada as of now. And that list is growing each day.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Assemblyman Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Assemblyman Duran, for the presentation. And just a quick question for Ms. Let's see, Werlinger, if I can say it right. There's a limited amount of money in the Nevada Universal Service Fund. I'm assuming you had the federal subsidy that you talked about, and now we're changing it to include other providers. What happens if you run out of money in the fund? Do the folks that are getting the 911 service, do they drop off, or is the fund made up another way?
Assemblyman Roberts, Debria Twilliger for the record. So by including Lifeline broadband service providers into the fund, if via the Commission's regulations, an additional benefit is provided for broadband services provided to eligible customers, that we would have to increase the amount of the intrastate assessment for purposes of the Nevada Universal Service Fund. So we reset that intrastate rate each year. Our administrator for the Nevada Universal Service Fund, which is Solix Inc., makes a filing once a year and tells us how much money they need for the high cost fund, for Lifeline, and then we divide that essentially to simplify it by intrastate revenues that we're expecting, and that's the assessment rate. If with the passage based on the conceptual amendment, if customers got an additional benefit for broadband service from the Nevada Universal Service Fund, the assessment rate would necessarily increase to make sure we have enough money to cover all of the purposes of the Nevada Universal Service Fund.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up. And so it would be the choice of the provider to either pass that through to the consumer, or they would just take up the slack, correct?
Assemblyman Roberts, Debria Twilliger for the record. Yes, I mean, the assessment's done on the carriers themselves, and oftentimes the assessment is passed on to the customer. It's often lumped in, if you look at your wireless bill, for example, in a government fees, it's lumped in with other fees, like for the Federal Universal Service Program. It could be lumped in for 911 fees, for other fees that are assessed on, also the TDD fee, which is the service for the deaf. It's often lumped in there, so it's hard to call out what specifically, for the customer's perspective, what specifically is increased in their bill, but yes, the carrier would decide whether to pass it along.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair, for the question.
Thank you. Assemblyman Ellenson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And I think all my questions is kind of got asked, but is it the last presenter, Miss, was it Tweeney or I don't see her name up here, but I got a couple questions for her. How many agencies would actually fall into this? Are you saying it'd be power, gas, telephone, TV, any kind of utilities, period?
Assemblyman Ellison Debria Terwilliger for the record. I'm not sure I understand the question, but if I'm guessing how for the purposes of the Nevada Universal Service Fund, which carriers get assessed, it's only assessed on telecommunications carriers, and which include wireless carriers. So it's folks like CenturyLink, AT&T, Humboldt Telephone, and then also Verizon, T-Mobile, so on and so forth. It's not assessed on the natural gas utilities or electric utilities.
Okay. And a lot of the phones right now are actually being provided right now free in some cases. So would this be like a landline then? Is that what that would be? Telephone?
Assemblyman Ellison Debria Terwilliger for the record. I think what you might be asking is what kind of broadband service would be supported by?
That's correct. Because in my area, the only thing it is TV. So
the FCC is also making wireless broadband providers. Sometimes they're a fixed wireless product, which is a little bit different than like your mobile phone, available for the discount. I think this is something the commission would take up in the rulemaking. There are some areas where wireless is the best or an only option, and it depends on if it's fast enough and it meets the minimum speed threshold that it can provide broadband, and that depends on the type of wireless service available. So it would not just be, it may not just be landline type of like cable or DSL type of service.
okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Members, are there any more questions? I don't show anyone else in my queue. All right, see none, then I will go to our telephone lines. VPS, do we have anyone wishing to call in support of Assembly Bill 377?
To testify in support of Assembly Bill 377, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, we have no callers in support.
Thank you. Do we have any callers wishing to provide testimony in opposition?
To testify in opposition of Assembly Bill 377, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits of 139. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Thank you, Chair Monroe Moreno and committee members. Misty Grimmer, Grimmer, with the Ferraro Group representing Cox Communications. Cox is very supportive of the goal of making sure all low-income families have access to high-speed internet access. Our actions throughout the pandemic, and actually for well over a decade now, have proven this. During the pandemic, Cox was instrumental in the design and implementation of the Connecting Kids program that came through the governor's COVID-19 task force. As many of you know, that is a partnership between Cox, T-Mobile, the school district, and the business community to sign up all families who need assistance on the high-speed internet access. In just 2 months last year, Cox helped ensure that every student in Clark County had access to high-speed internet, and over 15,000 families are receiving that service for free. Cox has also taken steps, and any day now will be partnering with the federal government in the rollout of the emergency broadband system recently enacted by the Biden administration. This will provide subsidies through internet providers to households that qualify on their internet service bill. However, Cox didn't need a pandemic to happen in order to make low-income access to high-speed broadband a priority. For well over a decade, Cox has been offering our Connect to Compete program, which offers high-speed internet service to any family that qualifies for free and reduced lunch for only $10 a month and no cost for equipment or connections. I say all this, Chair and committee members, to make the case that AB 377, though well-intentioned, is not necessary. I know other providers have similar programs in their territories. The industry has very much stepped us up to the plate throughout this crisis, but was already doing so beforehand as well. Broadband is a competitive service, which is part of why the federal government has stipulated that it can only be very minimally regulated at the state level, and it cannot be taxed at the state or local level. This would put broadband under the jurisdiction of the PUC in ways we don't believe is necessary. For all these reasons, we respectfully request that the committee not process AB 377. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next caller.
Caller with the last three digits of 848. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is David Dazlich, D-A-Z-L-I-C-H, Director of Government Affairs for the Vegas Chamber. As you've just heard from my colleague from Cox, we are in opposition to 377, and I would just like to echo the concerns that she has brought forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Next caller.
If you are just joining us, we are currently taking opposition testimony for Assembly Bill 377. If you wish to testify in opposition, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, we have no further callers in opposition.
Thank you so much. Do we have any callers wishing to provide testimony in the neutral position?
Testify in the neutral position for Assembly Bill 377. Please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, we have no callers in neutral.
Thank you so much. Assemblywoman Duran, do you have any final comments before we close the hearing on Assembly Bill 377?
Yes, and I want to thank you, Chair Moreno, and members of the committee. Thank you for allowing me to present AB 377. The issue is not these companies providing the service, it's the amount of service per household. So that's my goal, and I appreciate all these providers helping out our low-income housings. But as you know, each household doesn't have the same amount of people in them, so, or the amount of necessity. So I'm just hoping that we can support this bill because of the fact that it's not just in my district, it's in every district across the state about the number of people in the household that need service. And I'm just looking to make sure that Nevada is on the road to get our broadband up to speed and have access for our low-income families. Thank you for your consideration, and hope you support AB 377, and would like to thank all PUCN for working on this with me.
Thank you so much for joining us here today. I think it was your first time in Growth and Infrastructure this session, so thank you. And with that, we will close the hearing on Assembly Bill 377, and we will open the hearing on Assembly Bill 388, which will be presented by one of our fellow committee members, Assemblyman Miller. Whenever you are ready, Assemblyman, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, fellow committee members. For the record, I am Assemblyman C.H. Miller, representing Assembly District 7 in amazing Clark County. I'm here to present Assembly Bill 388 today for the committee's consideration. I've previously spoken to this committee regarding how the COVID-19 pandemic has brought into clarity the stark differences between the Nevada sectors of society, and broadband was no different. Last year, when schools had to go strictly online, the pandemic showed us just how large that divide was in our state, the digital divide, that can be defined as the gulf between those who have ready access to computers and the internet and those who do not, essentially the haves and the have-nots. Now, we know that in the information age where we live today, also known as the digital age, that access to reliable, high-speed internet service is no longer optional, but is as essential as any other utility that we use: water, electricity, natural gas, and now internet. Furthermore, households that do not have ready access to reliable internet may suffer economic and educational setbacks like those that have been highlighted throughout the pandemic. And communities without the proper infrastructure to accommodate high-speed internet may be economically left behind. Now, as our state makes bold moves to advance our standing as a leader in technological advancements, we must do our best to ensure that no Nevadan is left behind due to a lack of adequate internet accessibility, especially our youth, whose future will be increasingly dependent upon a reliable, high quality, high speed internet in their homes. Now, this is not only a problem for students who are negatively impacted by issues with slow internet, but many individuals working from home must make a schedule on who uses the internet and when. Like back in the days when people had just one TV, and I know there's a few of you on this community that know exactly what I'm talking about. But this forced families to make a schedule in order to not see interruptions or extreme lag times when needing to access telehealth services, or individuals wishing to safely attend worship services remotely, or even just socialize with family and friends. Many of them found themselves prevented from fully participating in any remote activities that are routine for those who have decent internet connectivity. This was even more of a problem in our historically economically challenged neighborhoods where infrastructure doesn't always support the best internet access available. And in Nevada's more rural areas, the infrastructure required for broadband simply may not be available yet, or it would require a large capital investment to purchase right-of-ways and dig trenches and do all of those things with line installation and all of that. Nevada made progress to improve its infrastructure and ensure more people could experience the benefits of reliable internet access, even throughout this pandemic. We went from nearly 1 in 4 students not being connected to confirming that all Nevadan students were connected in January. That is progress, but we still have a long way to go. And what we hope will continue to come out of the federal government in the future will get us much closer to an always totally connected Nevada. But we can't wait on them. Our time to act is now. And we Nevadans must ensure that we have our own mechanism in place that is forward thinking, can build on what we've done, and further supplement what we expect to receive, with a goal of not just closing the digital divide, but keeping it closed. Now, the amended version of Assembly Bill 388 seeks to do exactly that by inviting all Nevadans to take care of our own and ensure equitable, reliable internet access is available to all Nevadans, regardless of their zip code, their neighborhood, or how close they are to a population center. In short, the amendment repeals the definition of broadband previously proposed in my bill. And that is actually captured, as you've heard, in Assemblywoman Duran's bill, AB 377. Our bills were intended to complement each other, not be one or the other, and not be duplicative. So this amendment further clarifies that the program proposed in AB 388 in the amended version may be funded through voluntary contributions from broadband and commercial mobile radio customers, which is our wireless providers. Submitted with their bill, customers can, these funds will be submitted through customers' monthly bills on an opt-in voluntary basis through something similar to what I like to call a roundup program, where wireless and broadband providers will opt into this program, which would then allow the customers to opt in and round up their bills to the nearest dollar. Knowing their goodwill donations are going into Nevada's Universal Services Fund and earmarked to expand and maintain the availability of reliable broadband service for those who have the most difficulties accessing it around our state. These earmarked funds will then be distributed to OSIT, the Office of Science, Innovation, and Technology, and used for infrastructure grants for broadband development in historically low-income and rural communities across Nevada. Additionally, the amendment would require that OSIT would require OSIT to map the state to determine locations where internet service does not meet the definition of broadband, and to provide a report biannually to the governor and legislature that summarizes broadband availability throughout the state, identifies communities with broadband service that meet the state's statutory definition of broadband service and those that do not, and provides recommendations for the deployment of broadband infrastructure to underserved communities. The measure also requires OSIT to develop a broadband-ready community certification to encourage our local governments to adopt policies that increase broadband infrastructure deployment. I believe there's a model ordinance that has been used in a number of other state and local jurisdictions. Mr. Mitchell, Director Mitchell from OSIT is on the line to answer some questions related to that. I thank you committee members for your time today, and I urge you to support this measure to ensure Nevada continues to close the digital divide and ensure equitable access to the benefits of broadband for every Nevadan, regardless of their socioeconomic status or zip code. I was able to work closely with Director Brian Mitchell from the Office of Science, Innovation, and Technology within the Office of the Governor, and Debria Terwilliger, counsel for the Public Utilities Commission of Nevada, to develop the amended language. They are both here and available to answer more technical questions related to them. And I was also able to work with our broadband and wireless stakeholders on clarifying the voluntary nature of the program. With that, I am ready for questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Assemblyman Miller. Will the others that you mentioned, will they be adding anything to testimony or just here to provide answers to questions?
In the interest of time, I'm sorry, Assemblyman Cameron C.H. Miller, for the record, in the interest of time, they will not make any additional remarks. They will just be here to answer questions. And I'm sure if they have any thoughts that they like to add, they can work that around the questions that they answer. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay. I know we have a few people in the queue. We will move to questions. The first up is Assemblyman Levitt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the presentation, Assemblyman Miller. So from what I hear, it's contingent upon current customers' willingness to round up their bill to help fund this effort. So if they don't get enough funding through that effort, how do you choose who gets the higher internet rate, or bit rate, whatever they're calling it, and who doesn't? If the funding doesn't come through in its entirety to service everyone who is requesting that increase, how would you choose, assuming that some people at all would be willing to do that? How do you choose who gets it and who doesn't?
Thank you for the question, Assemblyman Levitt. It's Assemblyman C.H. Miller for the record. So this particular bill does not give or deal with direct payments or discounts on bills. This deals directly with creating grants for broadband infrastructure. So in those areas where there are slow lag times and it's due to it being an infrastructure issue, or the rural areas that just don't have the infrastructure or the right infrastructure to get the best speeds, the providers would be able to apply to OSIT through the grant program to attain a grant to support their efforts in bringing broadband infrastructure in those areas. Thank you. And I'm sorry, Cameron C.H. Miller for the record, I'll add to that the funding, so the reason that it's grants is because if there's higher or lower amounts that come into the account, into the fund, the grants can then be determined based on what is in the account. So we don't run into a place where there can be more requests than what's available.
So it's a first come, first serve by the provider? Is that how it works?
Thank you, Assemblyman Miller, for the record. That would be something that will be determined in the grant program that OSIT will develop. So I would imagine that, like any other grant programs, you would, you'll have a set parameters that you have to meet, and then there would be an evaluation to determine which providers would get those grants, or which projects I think would get those grants.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Assemblyman Watts?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I don't know if this question should be directed to OSIT perhaps. So I'll ask, and whoever is appropriate, feel free to chime in. I do note that I think it was under the Governor's Office of Economic Development, there was recently a broadband study. So I was just wondering if you could speak to what do we currently know about the needs for this infrastructure? And then how would the report and evaluation that's in this envisioned in this legislation support that? So that's one. I'll start with that. Just the kind of evaluation of the infrastructure. And I have a very brief follow-up.
Good afternoon, committee members and Vice Chair Watts. Brian Mitchell, Director of OSIT, for the record. And thank you for the question. At OSIT, we maintain a list of projects and needs throughout the state based on our work with telecommunications providers and communities. We regularly work with communities around the state to determine what the needs are for broadband infrastructure. And certainly as demands for data and faster internet speeds continue to grow, infrastructure that was sufficient years ago often needs to be expanded into becoming more scalable to the needs of the future. So certainly the mapping effort that is proposed as a part of this bill is a part of a federal effort to understand needs throughout the state, and so OSIT would be joining that federal effort in order to provide better data to inform our infrastructure development projects that go on throughout the state. And so to be clear, we wouldn't be requesting any additional information from providers beyond what is going into the federal mapping project. However, the understanding the needs that we have throughout the state would be very important to our work to understand where to best deploy new infrastructure, as well as if there was ever another shelter-in-place event, such as the COVID-19 pandemic. It would also allow us to be able to know in the moment where to deploy emergency infrastructure in order to ensure that vulnerable communities remain connected to the internet.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. And along the lines of the federal project that's underway, we know that there's already been some federal funds approved. And I understand this is a policy committee, so I'm just looking high level to understand ways that this voluntary grant program to support infrastructure, is that something that would be envisioned as being able to support or help leverage additional federal dollars to help complete some of these projects and close the digital divide in the state?
Assemblyman Miller, for the record. Assemblyman Watts, thank you for the question. I just need to be, I guess, if you can clarify a little more of what you are addressing, because I think that in your question, the way it sounded to me, it was like it was addressing two different things. And so if you're referring to the mapping portion and the data that's collected from that, I would lean to or point to Director Mitchell to answer that question. And then if you have on the top part of your question, if you could re-ask that, I'll do my best to answer it. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. And yeah, the first part was about the mapping, and the follow-up question was about the funding. So I was just wondering how that voluntary program that would be established to help gather additional resources to support broadband infrastructure projects in the state, how that may be able to work in tandem with or help leverage additional federal resources that are specifically targeted for improving broadband service in the state.
Thank you. So Assemblyman Miller, for the record. So in regards to the funding, yes, it is my intent that that funding would be able to, in the program would be able to be in addition to supplement or be on top of what the federal government provides for us. And then I imagine that having the data of the mapping along with that would also make more grants that they develop, make us more available for the grants that they develop. But I will lean to Director Mitchell to provide some additional clarity there. Thank you.
Brian Mitchell, Director of OSIT, for the record. Thank you, Assemblyman Watts, for the question. And I think you've hit the nail right on the head, where the funding that would come into this account would support the state broadband development plan and infrastructure deployment plan. And there, while the grants that are coming or the funding that's coming from the federal government through the Biden administration's COVID relief bill do not require a match, there are other ongoing federal grant programs for broadband that do require match. And so if we look out into the distant future, this funding could possibly be used as a match for those programs. But as in the short term, I think we would use it to supplement other investments that we make through other dollar amounts. And one of the conversations we had with Assemblyman Miller is that any funding that would come in through this project would be prioritized for, in particular, for underserved communities. Certainly, that's a big priority and an overarching priority of the state broadband plan. But in particular, we would make sure that the funding is directed in that way.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mitchell, for that clarification, and Madam Chair, for the indulgence. I just wanted to try and get that on the record. And as we know, this is something we struggle with in terms of being able to generate matching funds to pull down significant additional federal resources to meet the state's needs. And I just want to applaud Assemblyman Miller, because I think this is an innovative approach that, again, is a voluntary program that can help us bring in the resources and multiply them by potentially bringing in additional federal support and meeting some of the needs that our existing resources are not able to. So thank you.
Thank you. The talk about grants and funding and resources coming into our state, you're singing my heart song. This committee sponsored a grant overhaul bill, so that plays right into what we're trying to do as a state. I believe Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong has comment.
Thank you, Chair Monroe Moreno and Assemblyman Miller, for a wonderful presentation, out-of-the-box thinking, forward thinking. I would just like to note that in my other life, we have we receive dollars through the DMV for complete street projects that are dispersed throughout southern Nevada for to communities who are trying to implement these types of projects that are, widening of sidewalks, extending sidewalks where needed, improving the life of our citizens. And I think that giving Nevadans an opportunity to round up or contribute $1 to their bill to help out. We see these types of projects through our utilities. I participated in a senior voluntary $1 a month to help seniors keep their bill costs down for many years, and it has helped numerous people. This is a way for us to begin and a way for us to also receive grant dollars, and to Vice Chair Watts and Chair Monroe Moreno's heart songs have money for matching. I would just ask one question, and that is, has there been any discussion with Nevada Department of Transportation and whether or not, since we're talking about the expansion of broadband, if as part of their highway projects, especially in rural areas, are they laying any conduit so that when money comes and you all can pay for the expansion of broadband, that the piping is there and then the wire just needs to be pulled? I think that might be a conversation that you might want to have with them to sort of think ahead on this kind of thing in preparation of the expansion of your broadband by being able to pull the high, I can't think of the word, but you know, the wire. So anyway, you know what I mean. Thank you. Great idea. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong, Assemblyman C.H. Miller. For the record, I have not had those conversations. I think they are advantageous to have, but I would also ask Director Mitchell to weigh in here. He may already know if that is a conversation that's being had.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong. Brian Mitchell, Director of OSIT, for the record. And the comment that you made was music to my ears. In 2017, we proposed and the legislature enacted SB 53, which gave the Nevada Department of Transportation the authority to, during road projects when they had the road already dug up, gave NDOT the authority to lay extra conduit that could be used for private providers. And so the concept of joint trenching and is one that is already on the books here in Nevada, and it's been and is being used in to great success in many of the rural areas of the state.
Members, any other questions for the presenter before we move to questions?
Yeah, I had one, ma'am.
Go ahead. Assemblyman Ellison, I believe you muted your mic.
Yeah, I turned it off and it went right back on. I know that they NDOT's been working on I-80 all the way down, and it's going across the state now, and it's doing a great job. Question I've got is some of these rural areas like Ely and some of these that you know, that is jackpot, and some of these that are having a hard time getting internet through high-speed internet. So if they applied for the grant, then that money would go to run the services into them communities. Is that correct?
Thank you for the question, Assemblyman Ellison. Assemblyman C.H. Miller, for the record. Yes, that would be the goal. So the providers, the ones that are actually going to do the development or put the infrastructure in, would be able to apply for the grants for those, you know, communities that are very, very rural.
That's very thoughtful of you, some of them areas. So thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other members with questions, we will go to our phone lines. For our broadcasting staff, do we have anyone in the queue wishing to provide testimony in support of Assembly Bill 388?
To testify in support of Assembly Bill 388, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits of 087. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
This is Jared Luke, Jaredluke, Government Affairs Director for the City of North Las Vegas. Thank you, Chairman Moreno and Vice Chair Watts and the committee members for hearing this bill. I want to give a loud, or I should say quiet, round of applause to Assemblyman Miller for bringing this bill. I could go on and on about what North Las Vegas has seen and done in this area, but in the interest of time, I know you have a hard stop. I will share this quick story. During the height of the pandemic, when CCSD went to a distance learning model, there was a broadband bus parked across the street from the office here in the Smith's parking lot. And it was there until about 11:30 in the morning. And every day I came to work, I would look out the window and I would see kids sitting on the asphalt or sitting on the curb. There were no tables, there was no umbrella or anything like that, and that was the only access they had to internet to perform or be involved in their schooling. This is the example, textbook example, or one of many textbook examples of systemic inequity. So I commend the Assemblyman for bringing this bill, starting this conversation, and I hope that some of the other conversations that are going on right now in this this session about grants and things like that can point the nose towards doing something about these systemic inequities that we're facing. So round of applause, thank you, and I hope that the committee will take that into consideration and pass this bill along. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for sharing a true vision of why this bill is necessary at this time. Next caller.
Caller with the last three digits of 139. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Thank you, Chair Monroe Moreno and committee members. Misty Grimmer, Grimmer, with the Ferraro Group representing Cox Communications. We appreciate the multiple conversations we had with Assemblyman Miller working on the details of this bill, and Cox is in support of AB 388 as amended. In the interest of time, I won't repeat my testimony from the previous bill about what Cox has done and continues to do for the expansion of high-speed internet access for low-income families, but many of those details are relevant to AB 388 as well. This bill sets up a mechanism for long-term funding assistance to occur in a voluntary manner that is cognizant of the ways the private industry is also helping solve this challenge. We also support the portions of this bill that recognize the efforts of local governments to support the expansion and build out of systems for high-speed internet access. Thank you, Chair and committee members, and we encourage the passage of this bill.
Thank you so much for your comments. Next caller.
Chair, we have no further callers in support at this time.
Thank you so much. Do we have any callers wishing to provide testimony in opposition?
To testify in opposition of Assembly Bill 388, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, we have no callers in opposition.
Thank you. Do we have any callers wishing to provide testimony in the position of neutral?
To testify in the neutral position on Assembly Bill 388, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last three digits of 848. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You'll have 2 minutes and may begin.
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is David Dazlich, D-A-Z-L-I-C-H, Director of Government Affairs with the Vegas Chamber. I'd just like to thank the bill sponsor for his constant work with the stakeholders and addressing the concerns of the broadband members of the Chamber. We do appreciate the work that's been done and the amendments that have been made to AB 388, which mitigate the concerns that we had. We'd like to be recorded in the neutral. Thank you.
Thank you. Next caller.
Chair, we have no further callers in the neutral position.
Thank you so much. Assemblyman Miller, do you have any final remarks, comments for the committee before we close the hearing on Assembly Bill 388?
Thank you, Assemblyman C.H. Miller, for the record. I'd just like to thank you for taking the time to hear the bill and thank the Director Mitchell and Ms. Terwilliger, as well as the stakeholders that I was able to speak with on getting things as close as we possibly could to get this bill moving. So with that, I urge your support and thank you.
Thank you so much for those comments. And with that, we will close the hearing on Assembly Bill 388. Members, we finished a little quicker than I had anticipated, but we're doing good, better than we did on Tuesday. So at this time, the Assembly Committee on Growth and Infrastructure will recess until the call of the chair later this evening, which I hope to be at 7 p.m. at the latest. where you'll hear 2 bills from presenters. So until then, I will see you all later. And for those of you that didn't get a chance to have lunch, you have a few minutes to grab it before your 4 o'clock meeting. We're in recess.